So first came from a recent client, and I have the advantage of knowing already quite a bit about her. And I'll be honest, the first time I saw it, and I sent her a message back to say, I think the machine is causing a problem, but we'll go through it. So she's eating 90% clean, no snacking, steady protein intake, all the things that we talk about for everybody, taking all the supplements, daily exercise, 3 times a week resistance, training in the gym. And basically what she noticed was that days when the blood sugar, like most of the days, it was staying around 100 no matter what. And then it would go low overnight, and then sometimes the same food shot it up to 200. Other days it didn't, so it just seemed infrequent, these spikes. But overall, she saw that she was sitting on the higher end. And because of the spikes and because of already knowing her previously and seeing her blood results, I basically said my first thing is I think the machine is not working. So there have been, I would say, 1 in 10 CGMs, and she's using Freestyle Libra version 3. 1 in 10 I've seen just have problems. And then what happens is a few of them have some issues. So what I'm going to do is 2 parts. There is, though, what she said was, this is my second one, and they're very similar results. So then I went, oh, okay. Knowing what's been going on, this is possible. So I'm going to talk about 2 things. I'm going to talk about the possibilities of the machine not working, how to deal with that, and what can happen for the machine to be even not consistent. And then we're going to talk about this being an actual case and what to do. So let me first jump to some of the issues with the CGMs. And this is where I wanted to start. So basically, in the very beginning, it can be less accurate as it's adjusting. And what you have to understand is the difference between the blood glucose manual meter and the CGM is the blood glucose is going into the blood. You're collecting blood. While the CGM works on interstitial, meaning in between the cells, the fluid that's in between the cells. And so there is a slight difference, but they should still, after a period, be quite similar on a good, if both are accurate. So there should be something. So one, if there was a problem, it could have been the placement. Most people today are putting it on their triceps, especially the Freestyle Libra. However, if a person is dehydrated, obviously that's going to affect the fluid, the interstitial fluid between the cells. So we have to always, it's a great reminder, keep your hydration high. And it's not just about water, it's about having minerals in there. There can be some medications, especially paracetamol. So if you had a headache and you took a paracetamol and then the CGM went a bit funny, that can get in the way. Temperature, I've seen at Action Point, people jumping into the sauna and the ice bath and that messing the machines up and destroying them too. As the sensor, they last about 2 weeks, but as you're hitting for some, day 10, the accuracy can go down. So we have to take that into consideration. The other is a big one. It's when you compress, especially in sleep, the sensor, then that can affect the results. So some people I've seen have a overnight blood sugar of like, if we're talking milligrams per deciliter of 20 and 30, and it's like, no, it didn't get that low. It's just the reader. There's a problem there. So it can, in terms of as you compress it, as it, in terms of not able to access or is not cleanly in that, getting that interstitial fluid, then that can be an issue. Rapid changes to the CGM can see those rapid changes, the spikes and the drops, they can be a bit exaggerated. So what do we do? Well, if we think we're really out, we need to get it checked, either at a clinic to get theirs, or I do recommend anyone with a constant glucose meter to also have a manual glucose meter, to just check it. I like the manual ones because they just, before and after meals, I can focus on it then, and in terms of cost-wise, obviously buying a new one every 2 weeks can be an issue. But if you're just looking long-term, I like the manual ones because you can just say, okay, well, I'm going to look at these meals at the moment. I'm going to look if I'm going to do a fast, has it affected my blood glucose levels from there? So see if you can also. It's a good investment. Most of the ones that I've put in a post, my favorites, but like the Contour Next, they're less than $50 US. So, and then in terms of the strips, you can just as you go. So having that as a backup with the CGMs are awesome, love them. It's an amazing technology, but just like anything, they're not perfect. So first of all, if you think there's something really out, sometimes it's the machine. Okay, we can blame the machine in that regards. But what if it wasn't? And this is where when she responded and said, it's my second one, Craig, what do you think's going on? I think it is accurate. I'm going to get it tested. I'm going to get it compared, but what do you think's going on? And in terms of staying at 100, knowing that I saw her blood sugar at a 75 outside of meal times, that's where part of me was like, I'm not quite sure. But we did a 24-hour cortisol urine test, and she was right on the bottom. Her prediction was when we were doing the test, it would be right at the top, feeling I'm still in a high cortisol state, but it actually came at a later phase. And what that can do when we used to call it adrenal fatigue. The words changed now. We talk about the relationship between the hypothalamus, pituitary, and in terms of the other hormones. So it's a dysfunction in signaling errors. And so if the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals don't actually sync together, then we can have some issues. But if we want to stay with the fatigue, when cortisol has been the body under a lot of stress, a lot of inflammation, because cortisol's job, as everybody knows now, is to raise blood sugar, it can be sporadic. It can be up and down a little bit. It's pushing harder, and then it's like, oh, I'm exhausted. So that can cause these spikes. It can also, if the cortisol is on the lower end, it can still a constant kind of, we're under stress, let's keep this blood sugar high. So what we want is we want a peak in the morning of cortisol, and then we want it going down. And that's one of the reasons I say to a lot of people, especially women, watch out for extending the fast in the morning. If you want to fast, maybe do it at the dinner some nights a week. But be careful of doing the morning, because the body in a fasted state will kind of want to keep it on a higher level if there's already some hormonal issues. So knowing that this person had some hormonal adrenal issues, then it can cause this, and it can then occasionally cause a big stress. When I see a food spike also to 200, it can be a food sensitivity, can be an intolerance. So it can be they're very sensitive, like the cortisol is very sensitive to the food. And so as cortisol and cortisone, stress and inflammation are connected, it can be a real drive to show that potentially that person's inflammatory. So that's why it's good to keep a food diary, to have a look. But when the hormones aren't balanced, cortisol and blood sugar blood sugar can fluctuate. So what do we do about that? We work on the basics. If we know we have a cortisol problem, we're working on that and being patient, trying to constantly, I've put a lot of, in the next 10 days, I've still got 9 days, I've still got a lot of things also connected to cortisol and the mindset. So keep working on that aspect, having enough time to relax and basically balance cortisol as best as possible. So that's the first part there. In terms of if the machine, then like I said, a good idea is to compare it with a lab or get your own. I find that really helpful. So that's the first one, and thank you for that, for submitting. Okay, why do I get a spike after eating healthy foods like oats, fruit, sweet potatoes? So this is, it can be healthy, but it can still have a high glycemic effect. Okay, so it's meaning a high blood sugar, it can spike blood sugar. So and this is an individual component too. There's some generalizations. Okay, the more refined the carbohydrate, the bigger the spike. But some people are much more affected by white rice, for instance, what would be considered high glycemic normally, than low glycemic. And remember, the glycemic index is far from a perfect scale. It's an average of 10 people, and they basically had people, the studies are great, they show some person hardly reaction to that carbohydrate, and then the other person really went to towns on a spike. So we really need to be careful in that regard to seeing that what is the overall picture. Okay, so how am I affected by it? What is affecting it? And basically, what do I need to do? So this is where a food diary comes really helpful. Writing down, had a strong spike that meal. Remember, you're looking for your formula. What food combinations, because we don't eat food generally by themselves, what food combinations are the best for stabilizing my blood sugar? There are some rules, though. If you're going to have in terms of your carbs, if you can pair them with protein, fat, fiber. So if someone said, I really want for breakfast some oats, put some Greek yogurt, protein powder, some good fats like chia seeds, flax seeds, nut butters, try that, see if that slows the reaction. Could be you're eating too much of that sweet potato, that fruit, those oats, those grains. So reduce it. Spread them across the meals. And then also there is something to be said, for instance, white rice reaction to warm rice just cooked. So when it's been in the refrigerator, it can often have a different reaction. Same as a sweet potato that has been all mashed up and kind of fine versus a whole potato, okay, a whole sweet potato. So just look at the different elements there, okay? You're really asking yourself, how is this food combination affecting me? I write it down and I learn from that. And then I test it again to see if that spike, as we know, it could have been something else, not the food. Could have been stress, could have been a reaction in some way. So just being aware of that. Next one, why does stress, poor sleep, study work, push my blood glucose up even without food? This actually was a few people different. There was one gentleman who talked about, or whose reaction was in classes, studying Portuguese, and his blood sugar just shoots up. So he enjoys the class and all that. So, and he obviously wanting to learn this language. So that excitement, stress is a funny thing in terms of stimulation, we can call it too. If we're really stimulating the body and getting cortisols going, let's go, it's raising your blood sugar. So I often even say to my kids, is stress, is it fear or is it excitement? Because they're two parts of that double-edged sword, like in terms of raising blood sugar. So what you want to do, and as I said, like see if you can really focus on being mindful, relaxing, breathing, and for anyone like stress management, if you're noticing the blood sugar staying high, again, cortisol is playing a role. Aim for quality sleep. Try in terms of exercise, watch the exercise, the role of the exercise. It can be because of really intense exercise or long duration exercise. So I've had one girl in particular, Zumba, just pushed it like 170, 180, like really like into diabetic sort of level without eating. And that's where the body, it potentially too much stress. So we want to look at those different aspects again. But you've heard a lot has to do with this stress. And that's why I keep talking about the mindset. Why does my blood glucose stay high longer after eating in the evening compared to the morning? Okay, so insulin, remember what's insulin's job is to lower blood sugar. So we've got glucagon, cortisol, they're raising adrenaline, they're raising blood sugar, but insulin's job is to lower it. But it's sensitivity, and we've got sensitivity of insulin, which is what we want, and we've got resistance in that scale. So as the night progresses, the sensitivity decreases, digestion slows down. So those evening meals for some people, if you've put that old rule, don't eat carbs after 6. Well, I love my carbs after 6 because, especially like my biggest portion, because it helps me sleep, it knocks me out. I don't want them heavy in the morning because I don't want to be tired in the mornings. And I'm very big on more protein and fat, like I've said in that first meal, unless depending on the training too, there'll be carbs, the portion of carbs representative of how much I've trained and how intense the training has been in the morning. But if you are noticing blood sugar is staying higher longer in the evening, wind the meal back earlier, wind the carbohydrates back earlier. You could also have a short walk. Walking generally will help people's blood glucose. It'll help shuttle that extra sugar into the muscles, into the liver. And like I said, just rearrange the carb portions and listen to your body. So you might find that lunch is the best place to put most of the carbs. All right. Next one. Why do I sometimes feel hungry even when my blood glucose is stable or high? So we just talked about cortisol, glucagon, insulin. Well, we have more hormones. We have leptin and ghrelin, and they are hunger hormones that are affected by our emotions. The cortisol again affects every hormone. It's a very dominant hormone, and affects in terms of our habits. So the big part is what you want to do is you want to just simply go straight to the things that balance the blood sugar the best: protein, vegetables. Add some fermented vegetables if possible. Drink some water. Some people are not hungry, they're actually thirsty. So drink some water in between. Try not to have too much water with the meal, have it outside of the meal, and mostly at the start of the day, wean down towards the end. But also check the emotional levels. If you're used to, so there's a physiological, we deal with more protein, fiber, fluid, hydration, and there's a psychological. Person is habitually or just in a stressed place that brings on that cravings. Remember, cortisol is not just going to push it up, it's going to encourage you to eat foods that push it up, essentially sugar. So just be mindful of those. Why does alcohol lower my blood glucose at night but then spike it the next day? Alcohol plays a real, it really smashes blood glucose at times. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people notice that the more they drink, they really gain that weight, particularly in the midsection. So the liver is a poison, great poison at times, but for the liver, it is a poison. The idea that we should be having 2 glasses of alcohol every day to extend our longevity, of red wine, I should say, those studies are getting challenged. Can some people handle alcohol better than others? Absolutely. And are there some cultures that alcohol is a daily part and they live longer? Absolutely. But then you look at the other aspects, what their food, their community, their stress levels, cortisol. So we have to watch out. If you've got a lot of stress, you live in a normal world, you've got a job, you've got all those other factors, alcohol can add to the problems there. So it's trying to keep it moderate. And as I often say, 1 to 2 glasses, 1 to 2 times a week. But it goes after the liver. And the liver's job, obviously, is processing this glucose. So if you suddenly affect and you block in terms of the ability to release the glucose, blood sugar is going to potentially dip, but then it's later going to rebound. It's a bit like also when smashing sugar, I talk about the kids at the birthday party. What goes up really high goes down really high. So if alcohol's blocking the liver's ability to release it, it blocks it, and then it's like a dam being broken, and suddenly here goes the blood sugar the next day. What do we do? Well, when you're drinking, first and foremost is have a high protein meal. So you might cut the carbs down on that meal. Instead of you're out to dinner with friends and you're having some protein, some vegetables, some good fats, okay? Choose the lowest sugar. We were talking about what's the ideal, and I'll say, I think a vodka, a soda, and lime is one of the best, and gave an interesting, in terms of the fitness drink. But then what you can do is change the drink. So when you have vodka soda with lime, you can just have a soda of lime in between that. But watch out for the high sugar versions, and obviously, the better ones, maybe the vodkas, the dry wines, but the lowest sugar, even in terms of the low alcohol beers. But they'll still affect the liver and the carbohydrate count. The other thing I'll say is definitely hydrate well. The body really, with alcohol, the dehydration, and we've talked so much, and I've got a post coming up in terms of dehydration again, because it's so critical to be hydrated for blood sugar balance. So just watch out for that there. Okay, why do I get different blood glucose responses to the same meal on different days? So we want to, if we have a meal, we want to repeat it and see how similar. But what happens if it's different? Unfortunately, it's not just the food that affects. That's why I always talk about the foundations: mindset, lifestyle, nutrition, movement. So sleep, stress, when did you have the meal? What was it? How was it paired with the exercise for the day? How was hydration? All those factors come into it. And it's impossible to be like a pure controlled, like in terms of experiments, but you're just looking for cues. So track those variables, track how did I sleep, think about the meal in relation to stress, exercise, hydration, and look for that. And just keep trying the meal. Hey, that feels okay. It's kind of in the range. Most times it works pretty well. And I've just got to pay attention to my cortisol, to my hydration. But again, looking for balanced meals. Understanding, again, keep talking about the protein, the fiber, the looking after the microbiome, supporting the microbiome. And as your microbiome gets better, blood sugar response gets better. Okay, why do I see a slow, steady climb in blood glucose after a big meal instead of a sharp spike? Well, in terms of the large meal, it's depending on how long it takes to digest versus if you had, for instance, a small meal that was a processed food, high sugar. It might have been a combination like an energy bar or something like that. Boom, it goes up. But if it's a big meal, sometimes it just takes time to obviously digest. And we just have to find out, okay, how high did it go? If that big meal kept it, it hardly spiked and then it came down, then great. But what happens if that big meal just keeps going up, 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 up? Then maybe the meal was too big. Okay, reduce it. I often say to adults, breakfast, lunch, dinner, but sometimes, depending on stress levels, depending on a person's digestion, breaking it up and adding a meal or two can be helpful. Same as reducing a meal can be helpful. But sometimes for those who are doing the 1 to 2 meals a day, if the meal is too big, that can push the blood sugar for long periods of time too high. And depending on when the meal is. So always add the walking, the gentle movement, and obviously watch the timing. If it's too late digestion, there could be some issues there. I could sense, I'll tell you, so many different people get different responses here. So some people, that big meal once a day actually works really well for them. Generally men over the age of 40, 50, where exercise isn't like massive and they're just having that OMAD style. But for a lot of people, I would rather they good exercise and not overload the system. But again, there are big differences between people. Why do I feel tired or foggy when my blood glucose is inoptimal? So I talk about blood sugar and inflammation, the two foundations, but is that the be all and end all? Sadly, no. So you can have your blood sugar in optimal levels and still feel tired. Sometimes my blood sugar is in levels and I am tired. And I'm like, what else is going on, Craig? Or generally I'll be like, yeah, that was a tough week, or that was an interesting discussion, or something happened from a stress perspective. It could have been the night before I had a terrible night's sleep. So there are a lot of different parts. Definitely see to it that your hydration is good and add electrolytes. Start the day always with some salt in water, or you can buy a clean, no sugar electrolyte. Again, sleep, stress, review it and see what's going on. But balance in terms of caffeine, just watch out there. Okay, hydration. Why does hydration affect blood glucose levels? Especially obviously in those constant glucose meters, knowing that that's the fluid, the interstitial fluid. So we have to watch out for that. But less water makes the glucose more in terms of a concentration. And we know dehydration is a big driver for stress. Someone who gets very dehydrated, it's very dangerous. The body is fighting for your survival, trying to get things across. And think about, the body is constantly in a process of making, like the cell needs to remove these products and metabolism, whether it's urea or any of those byproducts. I'm not even talking about like the toxins from the environment, but just the metabolic byproducts that needs to go like out of your body through the kidneys, and obviously broken down with the liver, and then urinated out, or you sweat it out. Obviously, in terms of bowel movements, basically you need hydration to move the blood and get these things going. So it will cause stress, which is why dehydration is very dangerous. That old rule about, like, in terms of how many days, 3 days, 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, and 30 days without food. Obviously different for different people, but hydration is absolutely critical. So please add minerals. Remember, hydration is not just water. When you go, if you are sick and you go to the hospital, they give you saline solution. They do not give you water, or that will cause the cells to expand and burst possibly. So you need minerals. You are like a battery, a conductor of electricity. You need minerals. So please add at least salt. I love people having, that's why nearly every person, like one of the first posts in this was magnesium. Most people are deficient in magnesium. I love the coconut water out here, very high in potassium and minerals. So they talk about when they ran out of blood in World War II, they were using at times like coconut water. Trying to mix, staying on it would be a problem, but they're trying to have something with minerals in there. So just seeing that you get that adequate hydration. Monitor the hydration. Look for, I've recently made a post about that, so have a look again in terms of hydration. That's so important. Why do I sometimes see delayed spikes 2 to 3 hours after eating instead of right away? Again, it's about the digestive process. Some of the meals that are higher in fat and protein take a little bit longer to digest. So that the breakdown there will reduce the spike, so compared to simply taking those fast carbohydrates. So again, it comes down to the meal combination. Again, it comes down to prioritizing protein, having some good fats, and we're building that meal from there. If you're at a restaurant, always look, what is the protein first, even if it's a vegetarian, or so if you're choosing a vegetarian source or an animal source, what is that protein? Okay, and then I'm looking at my potential fiber element, and I'm looking at my good fats. Then I'll add the carbohydrates to that. Avoid very fatty meals late at night in terms of empty. And look, fat, I said, is critical to the body. We cannot live without fat. Those low-fat diets are very dangerous. But we can have too much of a good thing too. One of the things it will do is often give diarrhea, especially the saturated fats. But it'll affect in terms of the body has to break, and it has to reduce, emulsify those fats. And so it needs the right amount of enzymes and things. So just watch out. Again, listen to your body. If it felt unnatural, it didn't feel nice, then adjust it. And track. Again, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So write things down. Why does my blood glucose drop quickly after certain meals but stay higher after others? Okay, so again, reminding ourselves about the variations. And one of the things that in terms of the element, I see that there's a mistake here, excuse me, but in terms of, we've done that one. So why is exercise? That's it. All right, mistake on that one, sorry. Why does exercise sometimes lower my blood glucose and other times raise it? So again, light exercise, walking should be a foundation. You should be doing lots of walking. Strength training, resistance training should be a foundation. Build the muscle, increase the metabolic reserves, so you can overnight, basically your muscles are burning more fuel. So that's, remember, we mostly, unless cortisol's kicking in and burning muscle, we're trying to access the fat when we're in that fasted state overnight. But if we push exercise too hard, then it obviously can affect cortisol. So find out what your level is. Sometimes, especially Action Point, I've seen people doing much too much exercise and too intense, and results, they've lost muscle mass when a proper body composition has been done. They haven't lost body fat. Sometimes it's like, okay, have a bit more of a spacing, add more walking to it. Just watch out. Will it spike after training? For sure. It's just if it stays there for longer than like 1-2 hours. Okay, it should be coming down within the hour. Check the blood glucose before and after workout. See obviously how that's affecting it.